Welcome to Eyes in the City. Thank you for being here. Thank you for signing up. My name is Salvador Alanis. This is Jimena Berecochea. We are the founders of the Institute for Creative Exchange. This is an organization based in Toronto, dedicated and working with the artists to make exchanges and to help them with the international mobility, to connect, to form community of artists and thinkers and to reflect about different issues related to the creative world and the creative process. We're very happy to start with this event of Eyes in the City. We started with an idea from the interest of reflecting of the development of American cities and the importance of the public spaces in this process. One of the things that we noticed when we are both, we were born in Mexico and we moved to Canada, to Toronto. And one of the things that we noticed is how this city is growing at such a fast pace. And in a way, there were things that they are planned, but some of the things that have to do with creative spaces, sometimes they're planned, sometimes they're not. So we wanted to do like a reflection and pay attention on how the different developments in the America in terms of creative spaces have been occurring and have been happening. This time we are very happy to have Kasmi Chi. Kasmi has been working with us as coordinating this this part of Eyes in the City. We started first, the person that you saw on the screen on the video, her name is Alex Shaman. She was the one who started the project with us. Now Kasmi took the lead. And Kasmi, she's a professor for the academic program of interior design at the CRGS of the University of Monterrey since 2012, Monterrey, Mexico. And she's the founder of the design and architecture studio Interiorismo. And she holds a postgraduate degree in environmental management by the Universidad de Barcelona. And also she's a PhD candidate for the design, manufacture, and management of industrial processes for the Universidad Politécnica de Valencia. So we're very happy to have Kasmi leading this. She's going to introduce you to our guests, Yuval Fogelson and James Fowler. And thank you very much. Just one very quick thing about the dynamics of this. We would like to have a session at the end with questions and answers. So please, if you have any questions, use the chat that is included here in Zoom. I'll try to group them, and at the end, our guests will respond to the questions. So, Kasmi, that's all yours. It's your time.
Okay. Thank you, Salvador. I want to begin this Eyes in the City webinar by recognizing the traditional keepers of this land that has seen thousands of years of rich indigenous history and is home to many indigenous people from across America, from north to south, from Canada to Argentina. As we gather, we honor and remind ourselves to respect and nurture our sacred relationship to this land and as well to its first people, both past and present. I want to thank to all our guests for being here, from choosing from all the many webinars. You chose ours, and thank you and welcome. We gathered on this virtual venue today to address how cities are transforming in these challenging times. Our panelists will discuss their ideas on community building, digital space, physical distancing, and urban transformation. We will discuss how the present and near futures has been designed and presented to us. I'm going to introduce Yuval Fogelson. Currently, he lives in Vancouver and is a researcher at the TIPS lab of the University of British Columbia. He's concerned with the redesign of public space, responding to the organization as well as ascension of new mobility, the sharing economy and the data economy. His focus is on disseminating positive people-oriented public spaces transformations with the general community, as well as experimentation with holistic streetscapes designs. As a co-founder of URBI, Urban Ideas in Sao Paulo, he dealt with documenting positive public space transformations worldwide, as well executing urban physical interventions through tactical urbanism methodology. He has extensive experience in master planning and urban design transportation projects, spanning different countries including Brazil, South Korea, Australia, the Netherlands, and Israel, his country of origin. He holds a BSc in architecture degree from the University of Delft in the Netherlands and a Master's of Urban Design from the University of Sydney in Australia. James Fowler, he is a Toronto-based visual artist. His work is based on drawings inspired from aerial views of cities and maps. James Fowler's acrylics, oils, and gouache works on canvas, paper, and wood are playfully geometric and resonate with the digital world and culture of online information distribution. His non-traditional landscape paintings borrow from cartography and geometric abstraction that celebrate both urban centers and rural living. He attended York University in Toronto for film studies and maintains a full-time studio practice as a painter in Toronto. His work has exhibited in Canada and the United States. As well, his work can be found in private and corporate collections across Canada, the US, and Europe. Thank you, James and Yuval, for being on this online panel. This is an interesting opportunity that these strange and challenging times are boosting in so many different levels. We have seen how the online and digital communication has evolved in these past months. We had the technology, but perhaps we were not ready to understand that this was going to be our modus vivendi. We have seen how the art world has been producing massive online content and online activities that we can join for leisure, to study, or for work. But are we aware of what's the impact of these staying at home days? Now that the cities are reopening, that we can take walks and not just around our neighborhood, I guess it's not necessary to cross to the other side of the street so we don't encounter other people. But if we go out for a drink, are we willing to be at a beautiful design plastic cube? Do we have a choice? And for how long are we going to greet with the touch of our elbows to the people that we encounter? Are we condemned to live in cities of plastic barriers and online relationships? I wonder what is going to be the impact to our communities with these physical barriers. If we're going to be able to avoid physical distancing, to prevent social distancing, or we're going to set back in what we have developed. I want to ask you, Yuval and James, what are your thoughts on the public spaces strategies that the cities are taking toward these challenging times in matters of physical distancing? Do you think we can avoid social distancing with these proposals?
Should I start?
Yes.
Well, first of all, thank you, Kazmi, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so I think first of all, just you mentioned it, like the difference between physical distancing and social distancing. I think like the terminology is already it already caused a kind of problem. Like in the beginning, it was used as social distancing, and then quickly we realized actually they're talking about physical distancing rather than social, right? So, but I think the term social distancing is what stuck. It's being continuously used, but actually it is about physical. So I think when we're talking about the physical space, and how we reorganize the physical space so we do have that distance, then we're kind of entering the realm of architecture and urban design, which is it's kind of my field. So, you know, in architecture, like if you reorganize your restaurant or a shop and you put the entrance to the shop at the door, like you see all these shops which are attending people at the door, and then what happens with all the shop space, and like this whole logistic has to be rethought in a very physical but almost like an interior design architectural way. But I think the most interesting development is the reuse of existing space in the public space, because the public space is open and therefore considered, I guess, more healthy or less possibility of contact. And so we've seen in a lot of cities, especially here in Canada and North America and Europe and a lot of other places, we've seen how the street space, especially the curb space, the space near the parking space, is often used by restaurants for an additional space. In some cities, this has been done more formal, and other cities, this has been done less formal by the actual restaurants occupying the space. And a lot of cities have dedicated a lot of space just for cycling because, so there's actually two things coming into play. A connection between one, because more people are working from home, there's less cars and less congestion, less people actually using the streets. So then we can reuse that space for other purposes, which is, for example, standing in line to go to the supermarket. Some places have dedicated specific space for that, or space for seating for a restaurant. But the question is, what will happen later when more people will start commuting and when suddenly this space will get filled up again? Because now it's kind of not a conflict because that space is not being used fully, so we can reuse it. But the question is later on what will happen. So that's something that I'm thinking a lot about. What's the next step from here on?
My turn. Those are all really good points. Also, I'd like to reiterate, thank you for having me today, Kasmi. I think that the question about space and strategy can be answered by first looking at some of the sort of the concerns that we have around public safety, right? That I think that the leadership in any city first needs to look at the advice of the medical community or the scientists that are the professionals and take cue from that. And then set those policies and set those strategies. I think one of the things that's really important in sort of that sort of social contract that we get into is that we need to have that public cooperation, because without that public cooperation, things sort of start to fall apart, right? You're going to have differences of opinion. I think if you look to the science of things and we take that as cue, then we can kind of set our policies around that. Some of the things that I'm really liking to see, as Yuval has said, is that our cities are reallocating the spaces and using these roads. So for example, in Toronto, there is a whole route around the city using major roadways, and they're reallocating them on the weekends for bicycling. So off of what you had just said is that not only is it about reallocating these spaces, but also when are we reallocating them? So when we have a lot more people out during the weekends, I've experienced this firsthand. You know, it's like, oh, well, let's go for a bike ride, and we go for a bike ride, and guess what? In a city of millions of people, everyone else has had the same idea, and so we're now in these confined spaces. So taking that space, giving that breadth to people, I think is a really great thing. One of the things that I think that we really need to be careful of is like how, you know, I think cities really need to be, city leadership needs to be listening to other cities. So for example, we're seeing instances like in Florida with the beaches, there's places in Germany where they are reopening these spaces, and immediately they're seeing a spike in these problems in these weird times. And so things like, for example, in Toronto, I think as of yesterday, we do have, like, we've had curbside for quite some time, but they are actually opening up patios, obviously significantly less people on them. One of the things that I am feeling problematic around that is when you have something like a patio that is a bar patio, you know, are people drinking, and are you know, part of that social contract and having the cooperation of the public, are they being responsible, right? I think that one of the things that's also really important with these policies or these strategies that they're implementing is that there is space for community feedback. And that's where you're seeing things like bicycling coming in, reallocating places for pedestrians. So for example, this is Pride Week here in Toronto, shutting down the streets so that people who are going to go out aren't rammed into these like little tiny sidewalks. And then I think that it's really important that when you do get that community feedback, that the city is taking action on it. I'm pretty happy with how Toronto has been you know, we have had success in a number of things, maybe not so much in other places, but certainly in Toronto, it's not without its problems, but we seem to be getting by. And I think it's really important that the community has a voice giving that feedback, and that the city, they're taking action on it. So.
James, I wanted to ask you, like, you know, like we're addressing the community and what has been happening to the community. Maybe you want to just, from your perspective, just talk a little bit about what do you think communities in the cities are important?
Why are communities in the
like in your perspective, yes.
Well, the thing is, I think with communities, right, you have these small enclaves of people, and these small enclaves of people. Toronto is also known, by the way, as like a city of neighborhoods. So we have these number of different demographics. You know, they could be based on race, their gender orientation, socioeconomic income, that sort of thing. And it's these communities that come together, and they are speaking kind of in their own bubbles, and like they're sharing their concerns, they're sharing the things that are important to them. It could be an arts community, it could be a sports community, it could be, you know, an Indian community in the north part of Toronto, and that those people within themselves are finding their own leadership, and that those leaders are then going to work in tandem with city leadership, and that those communities are heard. I think without that, you basically, I think it's really important that there's consultation that comes from communities, because if you don't have that consultation, then there isn't that sort of public buy-in, and it's really hard, particularly around things like arts and culture or organizing public spaces, where you're like, okay, well, we're just going to tell you that this is what's going to happen there. And maybe that community doesn't want it, or maybe that community doesn't have those priorities that they're sort of being told that they should have. And so with that diversity, I think it's just really important that there's that open dialogue between those communities, and that they have an impact on policy and on strategies for the city.
Okay, talking towards a strategy, maybe Yuval, you wanna tell us what your perspective towards the strategies to build community?
I wanted first to reply on some things that were mentioned to continue that conversation. One thing that you know, it struck me about the idea of closing streets for bike riding, and having kind of these kind of like these car-free days, but in a more permanent kind of situation. And as you said, a lot of people in the audience might be from Central or South America, and so I think like these concepts have been used for a while. And like I lived in Sao Paulo, and we had like the main street, and every Sunday was closed for leisure. And there you really have the problem that there isn't enough leisure space for most people, right? For most of the population. So it's kind of like making the most with what you have. And like, for example, the Ciclovia in Bogota, which was a very kind of like world-known kind of initiative, which a lot of cities are kind of implementing as well. So I think it just shows that when you can do more with less, like you can do more with what you already have. And I think like that's the idea, to really use what you have well. And then again, there's the question of the informality. Like, for example, here in Canada, also with the leisure space, again, like here in Vancouver, for example, I feel like there's a lot of green and leisure space.
Hola.
Right? And I feel like there's a lot of leisure space per capita, and that there's not really a need to close whole main avenues so people have even more space for that necessity. So I feel like here there's less of that need, but the municipalities are kind of have more that the option to do that. And then you also mentioned the question about drinking, for example. So that's also something which before I came to Canada wasn't really an issue. Like in Brazil, there were just people selling alcohol on the street on every kind of street event, and it wasn't a problem. Whereas here it's very kind of organized and formal. And some of the municipalities here are now allowing drinking alcohol, like in beaches or public spaces. So it's like, you see how like the formality is being kind of, I guess, kind of softened in a way. And it's interesting to see this all happening. I don't know if I have a specific strategy per se for community building, but I've been dealing a lot with placemaking, which I think is kind of complementary to the tactical urbanism methodology, which I've been using a lot. So I think those ideas have been around for a while and have been in use. So I don't think that it's necessarily different now to before. I just think that now people are questioning more things and are realizing more where I guess the lack of things, whereas before I think there was the necessity was there already. So I think so maybe if we want to link that specifically to the act of physical distancing, I think there is a much more emphasis of local. I think that's what you mentioned before. Like there is no real need now to go to the other side of the city. You know, we don't really need. It's not true, really. I mean, for those who are fortunate to be able to work from home, then really there isn't that need. But for a lot of people, they don't have that. They're not fortunate to be in that situation, and they still have to commute, right? So. Yeah, I feel like for them, the idea of the local is not so, hasn't actually changed in a sense. And in order to build in the building community sense, I think now there is a accentuated localness and globalness. So like on the one hand, we're much more connected to people, even to other cities like we are now. Whereas before, these type of events would have happened more in real life, and then you could have only invited people in Toronto, and the audience could have only been from Toronto, and the speakers could have only been from Toronto, and you'd have a totally different discussion. Whereas this has really amplified opportunity to open it up on that sense of the community and that sense of geography, but in the sense of where we live, then suddenly we're more responsible for our neighbors and people in our immediate kind of environment. That becomes a new type of community, which so both of these, the very global and the local, I think have been accentuated. I guess
talking about the relationship that we have, the kind of relationships that we are building now, like for example, this online conversation. So how do you feel towards the digitalization of our lives? And do you think that the digital world can help us to build stronger communities, or you think we're growing apart?
Me? Or are we continuing?
James and Yuval, whoever wants to.
Go, Yuval.
No, yeah, I think it's a continuation of the previous idea, right? So I think when in the beginning we were talking about physical space, I think it then relates to architecture and urban design, which are physical, which really talk about the physical. I think in this case we're talking now about geography. So in a sense, yeah, like what would you mean by growing apart? Like physically, yes, we like. We may not be able to be in contact, but actually we're closer now to people from all over the world, and we can have stronger collaborations. I think these type of virtual collaborations are very fruitful. And before, like, not that they didn't happen before, but I think that before we would have filtered everything which is geographically distant from us, you know, and now it's been accepted. And once you break that kind of barrier, that line of accepting that, then suddenly everyone, the whole world is really can be part of your collaborative community. So if it's not for changing something in your specific locality, if it's like for a movement or for this discussion that we're having, then it's really fruitful to have people that they can be from other countries, other cities. So in that sense, yeah, I think it's actually brought us closer together in terms of the macro kind of community. But in terms of doing things in your city, then we can really feel the limitations of the physical distance, right? So I think in every case there's the both sides, right? Yeah.
What's your opinion, James?
I wanted to just go back quickly to the earlier question about communities and their organization sort of online. I think organizations and communities have always been organizing themselves online. I think what's changed now is how are they meeting up in person, right? There's like, we're doing things like this, but then how do we take this into a physical space? And I think that that's where we're seeing this sort of huge shift. One of the things that I think is really interesting to see is we look at sort of new technologies, early adopters, late adopters, and how in my own lifetime, I'm turning 50 in a year, and it's been really interesting to see the digital evolution in my own lifetime. Right, we've gone in university, we had email, we had the internet, we have social media, we have video conferencing, and I'm really sort of excited to see sort of what's next. And I think what happens right now, there's two things that are happening. Is I think there's still so many people who are late adopters, and because of this very special circumstance that we're in now, I think this is forcing a lot of late adopters, maybe people from an older demographic, to then to get online. My father, who's 78 years old, I have Skype conversations with him, or older people are maybe using these technologies. And I think that, like I said, that people are sort of drunk with the technology, is like they're experimenting with it. Maybe they're doing creative things online, like we were talking about. Somebody might do a play. Well, is that just going to look like a big table read, or are they using these digital technologies in a creative way that is sort of pushing the envelope? And I think that one of the communities that I think is really excelling at this is the online culture in the gaming community. I play video games only because I have a 10-year-old nephew who lives in Vietnam, and I watched him grow up in India from 3 to 6, and I didn't really get to hang out with him. And because of that, I thought, okay, well, let's use playing video games as a bridge. And he's now like just turned 11, and he's introduced me to some of these interesting things that are happening in gaming culture that are really pushing the envelope on how we experience the world in a digitized way. So for example, things like Minecraft, which is sort of like a digital Lego kind of building environment, they actually have within Minecraft, you can actually play virtual games with an avatar. And they have, I don't know if people are familiar with the Parker Brothers game Clue, where you have to guess who the murderer is. You can actually go and play in this giant, like, life-size virtual castle mansion, and you can play a game of Clue and run around, and one person is assigned to be the murderer. And I think that's really, really interesting. I love to see, I get so excited to see how things like the gaming community are using transmedia narrative. And another game that I play with him is this game called Fortnite, where you get in and it's like there's a thing called Battle Royale where you have to go in and it's like a last person standing. But within that culture, so there's a map that you land on, and on that, within those map are physical digital representations of the physical world. So for example, in one of these places, there's a drive-in theater. And one of the things that they're doing tomorrow night is they're actually at the drive-in theater at a certain time. Everyone's weapons are taken away. It's a special event. And everyone, with your avatar, you can choose your avatar. You can have all these different emotes that you can do. And this whole community of like 100 or 300 or 1,000 people are collectively watching a Christopher Nolan movie together. And I think that's something that really excites me, is watching how communities are not just, we're talking earlier about how often we use technology to just replicate something that we can't do physically. So we can't go sit on a bar. So they have like things like they'll have a DJ and then they have like 30 people and they're all dancing. I just really love that there are people that are really pushing that envelope and creating unique experiences within the digital realm. And I'm really excited to see more of that happening.
You just remind me, I was just thinking, like, I think like maybe like 20, 30 years ago, like chat rooms used to be a thing.
Oh yeah,
And,
ICQ?
ICQ, Mirk, and these kind of things. But that meant to be isolated, right? Like
Right.
whoever was part of these chat rooms, it was isolated, being
Right.
isolated from society, just
Right.
like having these little communities like connected to the world.
Right.
But it's really interesting how this thing that started to happen in a part of the world now is like really, really changing the
Right.
perspective and the way that we live.
Right.
And then you think about it, like you're talking about these avatars. I also noticed like all these avatars online, right? Like, but I don't know how I feel about it. I find it like funny, interesting, like really innovating. But I'm just wondering like if that's how it's gonna be now and then. It's been a lot of, we have achieved a lot of really good things from being like everyone being on like kind of the same direction, being in
Right.
like now we're on this, like I'm an avatar of myself right now, perhaps, right? But
Right.
it's like what's gonna be happening later? Like
Right.
when we're allowed to be on the street, are we gonna continue doing this? Like I'm just wondering like how much of that is gonna stay with us.
Right.
I don't know if you've been
I think
thinking about that, you know?
I think that there's an interesting conversation, a separate and interesting conversation that can be had around sort of the good and bad of the digital world, right? Where you have these like really amazing, unique experiences that people can go to that they can't actually have. So Travis Scott, for example, in the Fortnite, they had this virtual thing where your avatar is flying around and you're like flying through the concert. It was like absolutely amazing. But then you also have within the digital world, you have things like deep fakes and catfishing, right? Where you know, I mean, I don't know if you know that Adobe just developed AI software that's just been released, where it will actually analyze a face and it will show you where it has been digitally manipulated, which I think is going to be a really scary thing for like the beauty industry, right? Like if you look at magazines and this idea of perfection. So I think that will be an interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, I'd like to add something on that, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think the idea of the virtual world, like you were talking about chat rooms and how now it's, and then James was mentioning that now already like 300 people in a room, they feel like they're part of something. And I think there was a progression. It wasn't just by chance. Like when we had that time of the chat rooms, everyone was kind of anonymous, you know, like your online avatar was not really you, and there was no kind of connection between that and reality. So like the physical reality world and the virtual were kind of two parallel things, which you use your imagination to connect. And then with social media, everything became personalized. So now your avatar is actually you. And when people click on you, they see a real name and sometimes real information about you. And that has been normalized. Like in the beginning, people weren't so willing to give that, but now it's become really kind of the norm. Like you can't really escape that anymore. Otherwise, you can't log into many things if you don't give your identity. So that's where the real life identity and the virtual identity kind of merged, but we still have this in our minds, a separation of, oh, the internet is the internet and the real world is not. And I think then the next phase that we're in now, it's a blurring of those two. So like when we are doing something online or virtual with other people, our minds already kind of interpret that as if it's real. And I think the next stage afterwards, when more and more and more things get connected, because now we have like devices, like we have laptops and mobile phones, but soon objects will be connected, like the Internet of Things, right? So all the household appliances and all different things in the public space will also start being connected. And this blurring will continue to such a point where most of the active life, like all transactions, for example, happen in the virtual, and the real world is maybe submissive to this digital kind of virtual world. So it's a progression, really. So I think like now we passed this point where our minds already kind of, okay, when I'm like right now, like we're all in this virtual space, but we're treating it we're being serious about it. We're not just oh no, but it doesn't affect my real life, right? So I think it's a progression, and I call it kind of like a slowly slipping into this notion where once we've kind of gone too far, we won't be able. It's like there is no point of return. So I feel like that's the direction, but I don't know on what timeline.
I think something to consider is that we look at online or digital spaces. These are utilities, right? This is like no different than the invention of fire, right? Where fire can burn you, but fire can also cook food. You know what I mean? Fire can keep you warm. So it's not so much about the utility itself. It's about how we use it. Right? So we can use it for meetings. We can use it to stay close to loved ones who, you know, there may be geographic barriers. I was at a panel discussion at the Art Gallery of Ontario where they were talking, there was a panel discussion, and the person who works social media for the Art Gallery of Ontario, when they had a question period through Twitter, asked a question, and they brought the microphone over to the social media person, and the social media person said, oh, we have a question from Alberta, which is like across the country. And so using these utilities in a smart way to bridge geographic barriers and connect people, I think is incredibly powerful. But I think that there also, we have to be cautious that it can be abused.
Okay, we have some questions from the audience, and I think we have a really interesting suggestion from David Lieberman. I'm gonna read it. I mean, it's on the chat group, but it's like, he mentioned that the group is small enough. So instead of like, just like talking the three of us, maybe we can just like also include some of the people that wants to interact. So is that okay with you? I mean, I'm gonna start with the question from David Pedroza. I don't know if David Pedroza can have the microphone as well, but I'm gonna read it so you guys start to think about it. Like, he says, like, are online communities really communities? I'm sorry. Are online communities are real communities, or are they task oriented? Is the connection that the digital tools provide real and lasting, or is it just another phase of our liquid modern reality? I don't know if it was clear. Like,
I already opened the mic for
okay, so
David Pedroza, so if David wants to.
Hello, everyone. It was a very good idea to open the conversation. It's really nice to see you, some known faces and some unknown but very interesting faces. And the question is mainly, I recognize that those connections that build communities are very powerful using digital tools. But my question is if this provides real and lasting connections, or are they just task oriented, meaning you can sometimes maybe organize some manifestations, some event that can be global, but then it might just fade away, and maybe the digital not seen as something temporary, but as something lasting, will maybe reinforce our individuality. That's what as you know, our modernity is more and more liquid, and we just disperse more and more. And maybe we becoming cells that do not connect in a real and lasting way. Maybe this digital new reality will just drive us further and further apart. And my question is specifically, how can you see this becoming a real connection, a lasting connection that transcends borders?
I think there's two pieces to that. One is, I think when we talk about the online community, I think when you say online, I think we need to be more specific in our language, because saying online is sort of like saying books, right? And books do a lot of different things, right? And I think that the internet does a lot of different things. And the way we, like, depending on the platform that we're connecting on, it may have, we may connect in a different way. Certainly they are tasks, sort of task-based platforms, or there's ideation-based platforms. But for example, something you talk about making a real and lasting connection, Parker Brothers, probably about 6 or 7 years ago now, one of the things that they were tasked with was taking their board games where families get together and play, like Monopoly or Clue or all of these different games, and they were tasked with digitizing them. How do you play them online on a gaming console, or how do you play them on a platform like Facebook or something like that? And what they did was they researched the kinds of people that get together to play these games and the kinds of conversations that occur around these games. And then what they do is they try to emulate that in the digitalized version of it. So I think that, again, like a tool, you can get online and you can say, okay, let's all get together and rally around a cause or something and do something. But I also think that, like, you know, for example, I talk to my father once a week. And we're using these platforms to stay connected to people. You and I are talking right now. We would not have otherwise met, and we may end up working together in the future. So I think that you know, this idea that that being online isn't real, I think is a misconception. I think that there are people who connect only online. You know, you go back to the days of IRC and ICQ. I met somebody 20 some odd years ago who's one of my still best friends. And he has since moved out of the city, and that's how we connect, is online. So again, I think we need to consider very specifically how we're using different platforms, but also, yeah, that I think that they are for making real connections, and it's not just to get things done.
Yeah, but might I interject? James, you used the word emulate. Salvador, you referenced Baudrillard, which leads us to simulation. And I mean, Baudrillard is laughing at North American culture and saying, they're not interested in anything real. It's the alibi of avoidance, where simulation becomes more important than the real. And with all due respect to your 11-year-old nephew, James, does gaming become, again, an alibi of avoidance? Or, in fact, and something, Yuval, good to see you again. It's been a while. It's something you mentioned, and you were talking very much about the physical construct for architects and urban designers, as though that's what we do in cities, or is in fact our responsibility the choreography and setting up circumstances for improvisation, which would allow for a different kind of engagement. So yes, the online tool is wonderful. This conversation, and you know, I've traveled the world this week in multiple kinds of situations. But what is the space of congregation and communication in the 21st century, pandemic or otherwise, be it issues of environmental responsibility, systematic racism, or a structured society which is deterministic in saying these are the boundaries of propriety. This is private, this is public. And I think if the digital universe can in fact provide us with an opportunity, it's to blur those distinctions, to make permeable both physical, intellectually, and in a way of challenging each other to creative production and new ideas, not simply as, yes, it's convenient given the time of pandemic, but perhaps the pandemic has forced us to say, well, what can the tool really do? Not what it's a substitute for. And again, if I could return to Yuval, you described a number of things with sidewalk, shall we say, occupations or parking space occupations, many of which were done a decade ago by Janet Sadik-Khan and Amanda Burden in New York, pre-current circumstance. And it began to say, no, the way we define everything, that this is my territory of identity, is not that. Which, you know, James, you referred to Toronto as a city of neighborhoods. It's charming, but it's also a city of invisible boundaries. How can we contribute to each other? How can we have those conversations? Sorry, I know that was a bit lengthy, but I think I covered a bit of what each of you said.
I like you.
Well, we may meet in person when the pandemic ends. But it goes back to our two principal invited guests, and of course, the lovely Casmi. But James and Yuval, you're both map makers. And I say that in the broadest sense of the word. But, and you know, I looked at your paintings earlier today, James. Of course, Yuval's work I've seen, or at least older stuff. And it was the opportunity of interpretation. They were not maps to say, here's how you go from A to B. So be very careful in being, in fact, even more confined by the tool, i.e. digital or online connection. And David Otto looks so good. But anyway, enough, I will turn off.
I'd like to address just the emulation versus simulation kind of conversation. I think that there's a whole conversation that you can have in there, and that's, I think, where I'm getting at, is that I think that, you know, you pick up the phone, there's a great little meme that was out there, and it had like kids today, and it was about kids sort of standing around on the subway, and they're all looking at their phones, and oh, poo-poo, you know, those kids. And then it shows this old photograph of a bunch of white businessmen on the train in New York City, and they're all looking at their newspapers, right? So I think that as things change and we adopt new technologies, certainly there's going to still be people that are going to take, it doesn't matter the medium, the messaging is still going to get through. I think that there are people, particularly like a younger maybe generation, that are using, they were born with email. They weren't born in an era where they're, you know, you couldn't, like Wikipedia has always been there for them. And I think it's that generation where they're not just emulating something, and they're not just simulating the physical world, but they're creating a whole new way of connecting with people. And I think that there's also something to be said about how, you know, within that virtual space or online platforms, about that there are real world consequences for how we act and behaved on these platforms. And I think that that's another whole other conversation that could be had.
I'd like to also add a bit for the question. I think that it's not such a clear divide. Like, I think we go back and forth between all the tools, and we use different tools. So like, you may meet someone in real life and then follow up and digitally, then you have another thing virtual, and then you do something in real life, and then you continue in another, like sending a WhatsApp message, and then you go on LinkedIn, and like there's just, you go through all of them, and in our minds we kind of see all of these just as communication. Like, I feel there is a real blurring between what we do online and what we do offline, like especially for like the digital natives, what James, you called, like the people that were born. I don't think that we're really, that as we progress, I feel like people are not really actively noticing what part of the communication is happening online and what's happening in real life, because they perceive the person with they're communicating as a real person.
Sorry, Yuval, what's this thing you described, real life? What's this real life thing as opposed to?
Oh, just, you know, when you meet someone in the same geographical space, let's say.
Physical meeting.
I think Rodrigo, he raised his hand. I think maybe you have a question.
Thank you, and thank you all for this magnificent event. I think it's a great opportunity to exchange on these issues. I actually wanted to touch upon what James was mentioning before, and this whole concept of emulation versus simulation, and the concept of whether the online, the question that was raised, whether online is actually building communities, or is it just another facet to this reality. I think to me, the concept lies rather on what the concept of the individual is within the community. Because, for example, what James was alluding before of having met this best friend 20 years ago through IRC, and then having still this friendship once this person has moved away, and now thanks to these technological tools, are part of that whole idea of whether it constructs a community or not. Because I think that we are so used to face-to-face interactions, to being in the same geographical space with the community that we're building, that we've gotten used to that is the normal. And the point that was made about the youth having a different approach to this, because they've always had that online community, is going to make a huge impact into whether the communities will be built in a different way as the future comes along. Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, or if I don't know if anyone has perceived this, I do feel that online communities now in certain areas are building a real community to where members are coming along, and at the same time, physical communities that were built solely for the fact that they were in the same space, since there's other avenues and other opportunities to exchange with people that maybe you have more in common than the people that you have in the physical space near you, are getting disintegrated. So you're building communities more with regards to your own personality, your own needs, your own character, rather than just going to the community is the one that physically is where you are.
Yeah, I think there's a good point there within that, is that when you have when you're building these online communities, we run the risk of building echo chambers and over curated spaces, right? Where it's like, well, we all agree on something either politically or on some point, and we're not allowing or creating opportunities to expose ourselves to things that we don't even know that we're interested in yet. And I think that we can kind of it becomes a little bit of navel gazing, right? Where we're all like looking at each other's belly buttons and going, aren't we great? And we are doing a good job and we all like each other. But we're forgetting that there's all of these outside things. And I think that that's something that I think is a challenge that we have with digital spaces that we have we've mastered as people who interact physically. Another example of this would be just in talking like this, if we're all quiet for a moment, there's an immediate uncomfortableness that we feel. So for example, I have a small painting group that I meet with, and we're all painters and we're all isolated, and we use this as a platform to sort of connect. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is that in the physical world, when we get together, if you don't want to participate in the conversation, you can sort of sit there very quietly in a room and not really say much and have a drink or something and then go home. Whereas when we meet in these virtual spaces, someone always needs to be talking. And if there's not talking, then it's like, why are we here? Whereas when I meet with this painting group, there might be 5 or 10 minutes where we're all focused on doing our work and nothing is said. And then somebody says, oh, did you see this movie? And then all of a sudden there's a conversation that goes out of that. And I think that that's kind of a big difference that I see between physical meeting and digital meeting.
I think you're talking about etiquette. Like, I think we create an etiquette with time and experience. Like with online learning, now it's become kind of like new. So people are experimenting with things and slowly creating an etiquette around it. And I think I like the idea of the echo chambers. I mean, not that I like the idea, but I like talking about that. And I think really we're creating kind of a situation where we're creating multiple realities for multiple people, whereas in the past you had maybe your own opinion, but you'd know the other opinions, where the echo chambers are really limiting you to the people that think the same as you, and slowly we maybe don't know anymore other realities. So that's very dangerous, like politically, like to kind of be oblivious and not like, you know, like oblivion. That's a real danger, I see.
We run the risk of group isolation.
Totally.
Right? Where, like, we all agree on something, but our group disagrees with this group, and then there isn't like, well, we hate you as much as you hate us, and like, well, where do we then create bridges and connections to have conversations that can improve everybody's life? I don't know.
Yeah,
like, I mean, these are questions as old as political, you know, times. So.
Yeah, people think like we don't need you for us to exist, so we'll just disagree and we won't have like it's the lack of having dialogue anymore.
Yeah, I think Rodrigo addressed like something really interesting. Like we're choosing where like to which community we want to belong, right? Like when before we're just like encountering people, and I think it can. Now that I think about it, it can get really dangerous. Like now we also like we choose from where we get our sources. We choose like I don't agree with this news website, so I'm just gonna read whatever I agree with, right? So now it's like right now we're just like being bombed with all this information where we're like choosing which one it is, and then we don't know what's true anymore. We're just like really confused, and then as well we're just choosing with who we want to interact. So it might be like dangerous that our perspectives, like now they're like really interlinked, or maybe our perspectives are started to be like more narrow because we are agreeing with everyone that we're talking. They might like provoke in a way that they might kind of disagree, but not in a level that we can actually like trigger ourselves, right? Like I guess that's the thing, you know, like of these online communities.
I wanted to react on that because I think like you're saying we're choosing, but actually we're not choosing. This is actually being curated for us by algorithms of Facebook, for example. So that's the more dangerous.
Even more dangerous, yes.
Because this curation is so exact to your taste, and it knows so well what you're going to want to read and what you want to like. That if it was a real choice, I think that's maybe the problem. The kind of there is no more choice.
I think those algorithms actually are to our detriment, right? We look at something, we like it, and it shows more of the same to us, and then we end up with this sort of insular ideologies. Like we're all part of the same group, we all like the same things, we're all watching the same stuff on TikTok, you know. And that's one of the things that we have outside of a digital experience. In a physical experience, you can be at a party and you have probability and chance. You have a chance to meet someone who might not think exactly the same way or might have a different idea. I think that the spaces are much more limited, or that we're not using the technology to its full capability so that we can have these sort of more nuanced spaces where people can move through them and interact.
But at the same place, you might end up in a party with just people which are like you, because you know they're from the same industry, the same profession, and then you don't have a chance of meeting someone that lives in another neighborhood, so like there's both sides always.
Of course. Well, it's about like time that it's 8, so we've been here an hour. I think we had like a really good conversation. I'm just gonna, I think everyone can read from the chat, but maybe we can close with this David Lieberman, what he's saying. Like he's saying, like, is there a new space or forum for political question? What is the space engagement in the contemporary city? So maybe we can just like close this webinar by maybe like addressing these questions, right? Like thinking about it. And I don't know if anyone wants to add anything else. Well, we can finish here. I think the city is gonna have more webinars.
Yes,
yes.
Thank you, Casmi. Thank you, James. Thank you, Yuval. Thank you very much. And thank you for everybody to being here. And just one last thing. We're gonna have these conversations periodically. We're gonna have one like in 4 weeks. Casmi, am I right?
And probably, yes.
And also on our website, where this conversation is recorded, so we're gonna send you a link to download the conversation, and we're gonna post the video on our website also for you to follow. And if you're interested in knowing more about ICE, our website, we have some of the things that we're doing. We've been conducting seminars with like experiential seminars, not online seminars, with artists from all over the world. And now we're working on a digital platform for collaboration in view of the new conditions of this new world and the new rules. But we hope we can see you again in not only with ICE in the City, but also in other of our activities. Thank you very much. Thank you, and hope
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all. That was a great.
Stay safe.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.